Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. I'm here to talk about the newest uh, movie that I just finished seeing. It's based on the lives of the Von Erich brothers, obviously the famous wrestling dynasty. I have a video in the archives talking about um, them. They're, I said in that video, a previous video, that they're perhaps the most famous, at least what's going on, the most famous professional wrestling family in history. And, you know, this film is not for the faint at heart. This film is very tragic, very sad, and comes off, you might see from the trailer, the film is starring Zach Efron. You might see from the trailer that it is very a comical movie because it's a movie about professional wrestling. And in the history of cinema and professional wrestling, it hasn't been a good one. I mean, we've had semi autobiographical films like 2008's The Wrestler, starring Mickey Rourke, which was critically acclaimed. Mickey Rourke was nominated for an Oscar for it. And we've had other not so great ones, such as Ready to Rumble, 2001's Ready to Rumble, or 2000's, pardon me, Ready to Rumble, and 1989's No Holds Barred, just to name a few of the pretty bad ones. But for this one, you don't have to really be a wrestling fan per se. It helps to be a wrestling fan. It helps to watch my video on the tragedy of world class and the story of the Von Erichs, but you don't really have to be necessarily a wrestling fan to really get into this film. It's more so a film about family, about loss, about tragic loss, and how coping with how you can cope in life with the tragic loss of a loved one, especially a brother. Now, Christmas, as you can see in the background, Christmas plays an important part in this film and in this story. In some ways that they touch upon, in other ways that they don't touch upon, which I'm surprised they didn't. But they didn't really go into the factual details about why Christmas plays such an important role in the life of the Von Erichs, and Christmas is an important Christmas, especially Christmas Day of 1982 is the most probably important day in the history of world class championship wrestling because that day was the day that World Class Championship Wrestling started their greatest piece of business from 1982 to 1984, which really launched their father's promotion into the stratosphere. But do I use baby oil? Uh, I guess. I mean, that's a wrestling joke. I don't know. Perhaps. Yeah, sometimes, maybe. But anyway, this film, and there's spoilers in the film. So if you want to see the film and you haven't seen it yet, don't watch this whole video. But the film basically starts off in black and white with Fritz von Erich wrestling in the 1940s and early 50s as the German villain that he was. We talked about in the other video, but just to go over it quickly, Fritz von Erich, whose real name is Jack Atkinson, uh, was from Jewett, Texas, and broke into the wrestling business in the late 40s and early 50s, right after World War II. And in order to generate heat or become a villain in those days, one of the fastest ways to do it was to capitalize on the animosity of World War II and the hatred of Germans. And he portrayed as a Nazi sympathizer. They they imply, but really he, he had a whole background basically of a fake background created in the wrestling magazines of him as an actual Nazi. There was this whole backstory of he body slammed his commanding officer in the SS, and then he got kicked out of the SS. And in order to get revenge on the Americans, he was going to he was going to try to win the title back for Germany and gain a victory back for Germany against the American wrestlers. But anyway, the film starts off with that. He's wrestling, you know, singles competition. In reality, he started off in Canada as a tag team wrestler. He was trained by Stu Hart partially. It doesn't go into, or at least I didn't see it go into the death of his first son, Jackie Jr. It talks about it later on, which was the son at 5, 6 years old that was electrocuted while Fritz was in a match. The son was playing around with wires and he was electrocuted, according to Bill Watts. Fritz was the one that actually kicked the little boy out of the house, and the boy uh, that caused the boy to be playing around in the snow, and he was electrocuted and he passed away. He was the first of the Von Erich brothers to pass away even before the family got into wrestling. But anyway, they don't really go into that. They show Fritz in a match. He Then they show him backstage. He's with his three sons, Kevin, Kerry, and David. And the wife is basically Doris Atkinson, played by Mara Tierney, which I found interesting. It was actually played by her because she played the wife in Liar Liar. And if you guys remember in the movie Liar Liar, Fletcher Reed, which is a Jim Carrey's character, references Fritz von Erich's finishing move, the Iron Claw. It's something that he does with his son throughout the movie. In the Liar Liar, he puts the claw on him. So anyway, she plays the wife, Doris Atkinson, and she's basically telling Fritz, listen, you got to get out of the professional wrestling industry. She doesn't like the circus atmosphere of the wrestling business, especially, you know, Fritz being on the road. He missed the birth of his one son, Chris, who was born with severe asthma. That's the son they don't talk about in this film. Um, I don't know, for whatever reason, Chris Von Erich was left out of the film. But anyway, she just, and of course the oldest son, Jackie, Fritz wasn't there, according to the story that he he tells, that Kevin Von Erich tells. Fritz was on the road when this happened to the oldest son. So the wife, she doesn't care for wrestling and she wants you to be out of the wrestling business. But Fritz sees this as really the only really way that he could make, you know, a substantial living for his family, because he wanted to be a football player initially, but he wasn't good enough to be a football player. Or the story goes that because he was married to his wife, that he was kicked out of Southern Methodist University. They had at that time a Christian university, as I mentioned. They had a strict, in the other Von Erich video, they had a strict policy on who could be married and who couldn't be. And apparently, Doris had gotten pregnant, before they were married, and he violated the Christian rules and was kicked out of the university and was unable to fulfill his football scholarship. So he went to the CFL at first and then went up to Canada and got into professional wrestling. But she never really liked it. She never really cared for it, much like Bret Hart's mother. She wanted out of it. But Fritz is making money. Fritz is doing big things. He's getting hooked up in the local Dallas, Texas area with Ed McLemore, who was the promoter from the Dallas territory. We mentioned a lot of other wrestling videos that wrestling at this time in the early days was divided into territories, and the Dallas territory Fritz was gaining a lot of popularity, so much popularity that he, the German Nazi sympathizer character, had all of a sudden become this good guy. That he dropped the German accent, he dropped the German gimmick, and he completely became this local of the Dallas Fort Worth area. After the death of his first son, he leaves Canada. He goes down to Buffalo, works for Pedro Martinez, another promoter, and comes to Dallas, and he becomes a hero in Dallas, thanks to his feud with Gary Hart, who they don't mention in this movie, which I'm very disheartened that they didn't mention Gary Hart, because Gary Hart is basically the brainchild behind not only Fritz von Erich's turn as a babyface, because he orchestrated the whole storyline in the mid 60s where Fritz turned babyface, where he was managing another German team at the time, the Von Brauers, that the storyline they exposed Fritz as a fake German and not a real German with real German bona fides, and eventually that allowed Fritz to turn babyface into a good guy. And over time, he became the top babyface of the company because of his feud with Gary Hart. And Gary Hart also, behind the scenes, was the brainchild behind the Von Erichs coming to the Von Erich brothers getting into the wrestling business. He was the one who suggested to Fritz after Fritz was becoming older and, you know, couldn't move around really in the ring, couldn't do much in the ring, like in the late 70s and early 80s. It was Gary Hart who suggested that the boys be put into professional wrestling, especially Kevin at first, and then later David. Kevin debuted in the ring in 1976, which they show in the movie. His first initial match with Harley Race, which went to a draw, and they put Kevin in the ring at first, and it was Kevin who he's the part that Zac Efron plays. It was Kevin who trained his other two brothers, but just as they show in the movie, it was actually David who was the star of the family. David was the one really shining. David was the one that um, the promoters in St. Louis at the time was the most important territory of the National Wrestling Alliance. Like we said, all the other promotions were divided up into all these different other territories, but the most important territory, the home of the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance, since 1948, when the National Wrestling Alliance formed, was the St. Louis territory run by Sam Mushnick, who was the promoter there. And just like in modern day wrestling, when a wrestler becomes like the Intercontinental Champion, well, at that time, if you became the Missouri State Champion, that was viewed as a stepping stone to the NWA Championship. So Sam Mushnick and the promoters in St. Louis, they saw David as the star. They didn't see Kevin as the star, and that really causes a lot of dissension with Kevin because he felt like he was the more technically sound one. He was the high flyer. He was the one that broke into the business first, and he felt like he should have been the one considered for the championship. But Fritz thinks otherwise. Fritz not only does Fritz think otherwise, but the other promoters um, in wrestling, the other NWA promoters, because they all got together annually in this convention. They voted on who would be would they consider as the who would they put the world championship on. So they would all vote on it like the presidency, basically. Each promoter around the country had a say, and they chose David. They didn't choose Kevin. In fact, we talked about in the other video that they even sent David, and they talked about this in the movie. They even sent David down to Florida, to the Florida territory to gain more knowledge of working as a around the country in different areas. So there's this one scene where uh, Kevin is wrestling Harley Race, and Harley Race gets himself. And by the actor, whoever played Harley Race, was a really good impersonation of Harley Race, the 7 time or the 6 time, 7 time NWA World Champion, uh, the legend from Kansas City, Missouri. That was a really good actor, Harley Race. But anyway, Harley Race gets himself disqualified, and as many people know, the rules of professional wrestling is is that the title can only change hands on a pinfall or a submission. So if the champion gets himself disqualified, of course, the title cannot change hands. So Harley Race gets himself disqualified, and then David comes to the aid of his brother Kevin. He challenges Harley Race. And during the end of this match, Fritz says on the microphone, he's like, I choose David to go up next against Harley Race. And it's like, and Kevin is just standing there looking like dumbfounded because he thought he would be the one. And he's hooked up with this girl, Pam. It was funny because we talked about how the Von Erichs, uh, they had so many girls around them all the time. Like girls would just flock to them, and they showed us in the movie. Girls just falling all over the Von Erich brothers, and you would think that they'd be smooth talkers, that they would know how to speak to girls, they would have a lot of G, they would have a lot of game, and really they don't. You know what I'm saying? Like this girl actually has to ask Kevin, the girl Pam has to actually ask Kevin out on a date. All these girls, all these groupies that he has, and he doesn't even know how to speak to a girl because he's had groupies and stuff, but he's never really had girls that like him for just him. What I mean? And plus, because of their mother's religious faith and because of their father's strictness, with he wants them to just be focused on wrestling all the time. He has this vision of he wants each one of them to become NWA World Champion. And if they don't, it's like a he's like a Joe Jackson. Like picture, instead of music, wrestling, and instead of uh, politics, in the case of John Kennedy's father, wrestling. So instead of having that zero focus of you're going to be the biggest pop star in the world, like in Michael Jackson's case, or the biggest um, politician, or you're going to be president someday, like John Kennedy's father. Instead of that, you had wrestling, and that's all Fritz really wanted them to ever do. Nothing else. He didn't even want them to date girls. He didn't want them to nothing. You know what I mean? He just wanted them to just focus on wrestling all the time, and having that single, that tunnel vision mindset. And if they tried to do anything else, he would beat them severely, which they really don't show in this film. They really don't show the toughness of Fritz and the mean spiritedness of how how Fritz really was. But one scene that is in the trailer and it is in the film, I think because Kevin Von Erich had a lot. Kevin Von Erich, the one remaining brother, had a lot of influence uh, in the film. You know what I mean? And how it was directed and how it was written. So he didn't want to really depict his father in a bad light. You know what I mean? Because like even in the documentaries, like the documentary they did on World Class and the WWE and the independent documentary they did, he never depicts his dad in a really bad light. Like his dad was a strict disciplinarian. Like he always tries to make his dad out to be the good guy. You know what I mean? Even though other people in the wrestling business have been like, well, Fritz, he was a complete asshole. He pushed the kids and he pushed the kids. And he kind of, when you look at it from an objective point of view, he kind of was that. You know what I mean? Kevin always tries to make it seem like he was this, he was strict, he was firm, but his heart was in the right place. Try to make him look like a sympathetic figure, I guess. But so they don't really show a lot of the beatings, but they do show that he's strict. You know what I mean? The one scene that sticks out, like I was saying from the trailer, they're all eating breakfast, and Fritz comes out and goes, uh, you know, David's my favorite, then Carrie, then Kevin, but the rankings can always change. And it's like you have rankings for your sons of an order that you love them. You know what I'm saying? Like they're your sons. You should love them all unconditionally in the same way. Like your love for them is based on their drawing ability, is based on their marketability as a wrestler, is based on their athletic ability, how they look. That's really fucked up. You know what I mean? But in these kind of showbiz parents, you know what I mean? Like I was saying, with the parents that are like Fritz, the other examples that I gave, that's how they like say Kim Kardashian's mom. That's probably how she looked at her three daughters, for example. Parents like this, they look at their kids as like commodities, rather than just kids. And Fritz is sitting at the table with the boys, and they're eating this breakfast that is huge, this huge ass breakfast. Like tons of pancakes, tons of waffles, bacon all over, biscuits, just a crazy breakfast. And he says to uh, Mike, he's like, uh, Mike, I guess you got to bulk up a little bit because Mike Von Erich, he was not he was not a big guy. You know what I mean? He was slim build. He was a little bigger than his brother Chris, who the brother Chris, the one that said they don't show, his growth was stunted by severe asthma as a baby. So Mike was a little bit bigger than he was, but he wasn't much big and he wasn't really built for wrestling. It was more David, Kevin, and Kerry. That was the trio. And Mike was just he wanted to be a musician. And there's a scene where he talks to his family about music, wanting to be in the music business, not wanting to be in the wrestling business. And his mother, both his mother and his father, they just will not allow it. You know what I mean? The mother won't allow it because you're gonna go to this party where there's gonna be girls, there's gonna be sex, and the mother is a strict Christian. She's not going for all that. And the father, he won't allow it because it has nothing to do with wrestling. He views everything else as a waste of time, and it's all about wrestling, wrestling, wrestling. And he even brings this up when he tries to tell the dad, look, I want to go to the party. David, he got to go on the road when he was like 16, 17. And Kevin, and the father goes, yeah, but that was for work, you know? And the father's not having it. And they eventually, all the boys sneak out and they go to this party and they all get drunk and they all get high. And this is really the first time that they're exposed to heavy drug use, because when you grow up in a strict environment like this, a strict religious home, a lot of times you you your sexuality, your self-expression gets repressed a lot. So when you do get a chance to really go out and be yourself and be a regular young person, a regular kid, you go all out and with abandonment, and you really are not prepared for the trials of this world because you've lived this kind of sheltered existence. So that's kind of what these boys were like, and they were local celebrities, in Dallas. People would give them anything. People loved them, so they would, if they wanted cocaine, they would give them cocaine. They wanted pills, they would give them pills. They wanted alcohol, they would give them alcohol. They wanted prostitutes, they would give them prostitutes. They were giving them the world, and unfortunately, they was just not prepared for it at all. And uh, Kevin, the character that Zac Efron, Kevin Von Erich, that he plays, he seems like in the movie like he's his heart in the right place. He's dating this girl, but the other two brothers, David and Kerry, they are not dating anybody, and they're just going out with reckless abandon. Um, and so is the guy that wants to be a guitarist, Mike Von Erich. Now, uh, I mentioned that the father wanted them all to be in wrestling, but that's not entirely true. He did want for his son Kerry, um, Kerry Von Erich, to be in the Olympics. And in 1979, Kerry was going to go to the Olympics, and they show this in the movie as a discus player throwing the discus, which is something that Fritz Von Erich himself did in college also. But that was the same year, and we mentioned this in another video years and years back on a different topic. That was the same year that the President of the United States, and they show this in the movie, Jimmy Carter, uh, said that the United States would not attend the Olympics that year because they were doing it in protest, because the Olympics was in Russia at that time. They were doing it in protest of the Soviet Union invading Afghanistan. So in the movie, they show uh, the Von Erich family watching as President Carter announces that the United States is not going to go to the Olympics that year, and you can see the sadness on Fritz's face. So as Kerry comes back, he's not going to the Olympics, obviously, because he represents the United States. So the United States is not going to the Olympics. He's not going to the Olympics. So he comes back, and they have a big sign from "Welcome Back, Kerry." And as he's back home on the ranch, Fritz tells him, "Listen, why don't you give this up? Because the next 4 years, whatever, you'll be 4 years older, and you know you might not make it to the Olympic trials as a discus player. So just give this dream of the Olympics up and just come to wrestle in my promotion." And Kerry Von Erich, he's just like, "Okay, yeah, I'll do it." And then, you know, 1979 turns into 1980 and 1981 and 1982, and that's when they have their biggest year. And they show this in the movie, the Freebirds. The Freebirds, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy and Buddy Roberts, they come into the promotion from the state of Georgia. They don't show the famous angle, Christmas Day, 1982, that Michael Hayes slams the door in Kerry Von Erich's face, which I wish they would have shown that, because that would add a little bit of context to the six-man tag. The six-man tag that they do show in the movie. Because they show a six-man tag with a guy with long hair who obviously represents Michael Hayes, and another guy that represents Terry Gordy, and another guy that represents Buddy Roberts. But if you're watching this as like say Lisa, right? Somebody that is not a wrestling fan and somebody that has no idea who the Freebirds are and why they're important to the Von Erichs and what that all means in the terms of professional wrestling history, you'll be completely lost as to why uh, these six men are fighting and what's the story behind that and why that means something, why Christmas Day 1982 even means anything in the lives of these six men, and why are the Von Erich brothers fighting these this one guy with long hair and this other guy with long hair, and and the other team has Confederate flags, and the Von Erichs are against them and they're against the Von Erichs. You'll be completely lost as to why that event even matters if you either don't know anything about professional wrestling or don't know anything about that particular period in the early 1980s of professional wrestling. And that meant so much to World Class Championship Wrestling that I wish they would have, touched on that. You know what I mean? That when Kerry did first come into the promotion, he had the best look out of everybody. And I think this was a miscasting. When you watch the trailer, you would think that Zac Efron's character of the big, bulky, muscly bound Zac Efron that looks in great shape is Kerry Von Erich. If you watched wrestling back in the day and you knew about the Von Erichs, you would think, okay, the muscly bound, gorilla looking type motherfucker is Kerry Von Erich. And Jeremy Allen White's character, who plays Kerry Von Erich, is Kevin Von Erich. Because the real life Jeremy Allen White looks like Kevin Von Erich, and the real life Zac Efron muscly character looks like Kerry Von Erich. But no, that's not the case. Zac Efron playing Kevin Von Erich, and Jeremy Allen White is playing Kerry Von Erich. I thought it was complete miscasting. But anyway, for those that don't know, Kerry Von Erich was wrestling Ric Flair, and Michael Hayes was chosen as a special guest referee. And Michael Hayes basically uh, had it all set up for Kerry Von Erich to beat Ric Flair by cheating, but Kerry Von Erich couldn't do it because he was a good, wholesome Christian boy, and he pushes Michael Hayes, and then Michael Hayes turns evil and slams the cage door in Kerry Von Erich's face, turning the Freebirds heel on the Von Erichs. That when the Freebirds first came into the Dallas area, they were friends of the Von Erichs, and they were initially partners, teamed with the Von Erichs. But this turn on Christmas Day, 1982, turned them as enemies, and they feuded for ever in the Dallas area, and they made millions of dollars in a lot of six-man tags. So they show this in the movie. They don't show the initial part, like I said, but they show a match between the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, and it's just Fritz is making money hand over fist with his boys, and he just doesn't want them to stop wrestling. And Bill Mercer, who was the announcer, plays the part of the guy advising Fritz Von Erich. And in reality, that wasn't true. Bill Mercer was just an announcer. He was a famous television announcer in the Dallas area. He'd actually been working in 1963 during the Kennedy assassination, and he was a news announcer. And because wrestling was so popular, they got him to be on wrestling, and he was synonymous with the world class production at the time. And maybe he was consulted or something in the movie, but they play him out like he's the one advising Fritz, when in reality that wasn't, like I said, that wasn't the case. It was Gary Hart really booking the territory, writing the television, and coming up with these storylines, especially the Freebirds versus the Von Erichs, because he was like, okay, the Von Erichs, they're a good team, and they work well together in six mans, but every good guy needs a great bad guy. So he was the one who said we got to bring in somebody as their enemies, and that's who he brought in, uh, the Freebirds, and he crafted the storyline of the Freebirds and everything. Like I said, he brought them in from the Mid South territory. Initially, they were working in Mississippi, and they left Mississippi over some payouts, and they went to Dallas. And first, they went to Georgia. They were on national TV in Georgia at that time, and he brought them into Dallas, and they did the best business that Dallas ever did. Michael Hayes, to this day, he'll tell you, anybody that asks him, he'll tell you Dallas wasn't anything before we got there. You know, they set the Von Erichs on fire. So I'm glad they showed the Freebirds. And I popped, I had a reaction a little bit when they showed the Freebird match because, like I said, I know what it meant to world class. So anyway, we move into 1984, and 1984, of course, a critical year. First, Kevin Von Erich gets married, and then Kevin's wedding is kind of funny because his mom, obviously, she doesn't like this girl Pam. She makes a comment, "Oh, this is the first time Pam, the wife, has ever dressed classy in her life, right? She doesn't really want to see her sons get married or married off. What mother really does, right? But Fritz likes the girl, and the brothers like the girl, so they do this funny thing when they dance to uh, country music, and they're square dancing and everything. But after the funniness of the scene, uh, they go to the bathroom, and David Von Erich is coughing up blood. So obviously there's something wrong with David's intestines, but he doesn't feel like he could tell his dad because what's his dad gonna say? He wants him to go to Japan because he says, contrary to a statement that Booker T just made publicly on wrestling websites, that Japan doesn't matter to the average wrestling fan. Maybe that's the case now in 2023 in reference to Sasha Banks' career, but in 1982, 1982-83, back then, 30 years ago, it did matter. And what Fritz says in the movie is that you can't really become world champion unless you go to Japan and work for Antonio Inoki or Giant Baba. Well, I think it was mostly Giant Baba that they were doing business because, like we said before in other videos, there's two really Japanese promotions, All Japan Pro Wrestling run by Giant Baba and New Japan Pro Wrestling run by Antonio Inoki. But I think World Class, obviously being a member of the NWA, was uh, doing business with Giant Baba's promotion. So Fritz says you can't really become a world champion unless you go to Japan. So he's forcing basically David, who's sick and who has this intestinal thing, to go to Japan and work in Japan. You must work in Japan, the father stresses to him. So he goes to Japan, and obviously they don't really talk. They claim that it was an intestinal issue, which is the main story that they always run with. But as we said in the Von Erich, the other Von Erich video I did, there's a theory according to Ric Flair's book, and Ric Flair, who's in the movie, there's a character of Ric Flair, famous pro wrestler, obviously. And they have some of Ric Flair's promos right in the movie. The guy that plays Ric Flair, by the way, spot on impression of Ric Flair. He does the Gator shoe famous promo that he did, in Jim Crockett Promotions and other NWA. I'm sure he did it around the other NWA territories, but I saw it first on Jim Crockett Promotions back in the day. Uh, but Ric Flair in his book says that David Von Erich, Bruiser Brody, who they have a character that portrays Bruiser Brody in the movie. Another another wrestler that worked in the world class area that had something tragic happen to them. Uh, um, Bruiser Brody, when he was in the hotel room with David Von Erich, as David was dying, Bruiser Brody, according to Ric Flair, was shoving cocaine uh, down the toilet in the Japanese hotel room. So that's a lot of the story that a lot of wrestlers tell, that it was really drugs, but the Von Erichs, they did their PR move. They covered it up. You know, they don't. They don't. You know, they don't really tell in the movie or publicly again because I think Kevin Von Erich had a lot to do with it. That David's death could have been caused not by eating too much food and failing to regurgitate or some intestinal problem. That David's death was actually caused by you know drugs and alcohol. Because the Von Erichs, they were trying to make it seem to the wrestling press at that time, because wrestling at that time was still very covered up, still very under wraps. There's even when Kevin Von Erich meets his wife for the first time and they go on their first date, she says, well, she says, what does this all really matter? Isn't this all just fake? And he gets offended by the term fake because, that's his family's livelihood. He's been injured in the ring before. Why would he ever say that the professional wrestling business is fake? And she says, well, she uses a better choice of words. She says, well, what about pre-planned? What about, she doesn't use the word scripted or predetermined like we use today, that modern lexicon. But she just basically says that, isn't it all just fake anyway? You know what I mean? And that was basically the wrestling press at that time. The mainstream press really didn't pay attention to it. And the wrestling press, especially Pro Wrestling Illustrated and all the magazines, you know, Bill Apter, who was the editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, still is, I think, uh, you know, in charge of The Wrestler, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Inside Wrestling, all the wrestling magazines that we grew up with as kids. He was friends with the Von Erichs. He described himself as another Von Erich kid. So of course he wasn't going to report on any of this. There wasn't anything such as the internet back then. So people, even the dirt sheets on it, don't think even existed because Dave Meltzer, who's in charge of the Wrestling Observer, which was the first pro wrestling magazine or publication to cover wrestling as it truly is, as the true nature of it, the true backstage rumors and all that. That didn't even exist, I don't think, until like 1983. So wrestling at this time was really covered up. So there was no way that fans at that time could have known about anything that the Von Erichs were up to, because so if they wanted to present this saintly image of themselves or the image that they wanted to project on the screen, that was that was what they were going to present of themselves. So that, unfortunately, David Von Erich passes away. Then later, Mike Von Erich. They don't really go into the specifics of what happened to Mike. A shoulder injury in Israel, a temperature, as we talked about. He had toxic shock syndrome. Something happened in Israel, and he later, that causes brain damage to him, and he later commits suicide. There's a scene where he says to his mother that he can't live up to David's expectations. David passes away, and Kerry wins the NWA Championship from Ric Flair to David Von Erich Memorial show in 1984. and they actually show real footage of when David Von Erich actually, I mean, when Kerry Von Erich rather actually wins uh, the NWA Championship with a backslide against Ric Flair. But you can see the mother's pain, the emotion in the mother. Do I recommend this movie to other people? Yeah. I mean, I think it's a story of what happens when you push your kids too far, when you have goals for your kids that they don't necessarily have for themselves. You know, they don't necessarily want that vision of their life for themselves, but you have that vision for them. You have that dream for them, but they don't have necessarily for themselves. Like with these young men, you know, uh, I like I said, ironically, they don't they don't show the brother Chris that wanted to be in the wrestling business and he wanted to be a professional wrestler, but he was too small because of his use of a prednisone as a kid that stunted his growth. They don't show that brother. You know what I mean? But some of these other brothers, like Mike, for example, the one that died from toxic shock and then committed suicide, they don't show. I mean, he didn't want to be in the wrestling business. He wanted to be a musician, and the father pushed him into the wrestling business, and the mother just ignored it. You know what I mean? Like she felt like she had to go along with the abuse because the father was paying all the bills. You know, he was the traditional patriarch of the family. He was in charge. You know what I mean? Like she was really put upon. By Fritz. He was the taskmaster of it. He was ruling with an iron fist, or in his case, an iron claw. You know, with the house in him. What he said went, and the mother she just went along with whatever he said, even though she didn't necessarily go along with it in her mind. You know what I mean. She had no choice but to because I mean, he was violent. And he was a strict taskmaster. So I think it's a cautionary tale. Like I said, a lot of these stories of what could actually happen when you push your kids too far. And the scene that will get a lot of people, and I'm not going to give this one away, is the death of Kerry Von Erich in 1993. The death of Kerry Von Erich is the most powerful scene of this film, and so powerful that the guy sitting in front of me, or not the guy, the woman sitting in front of me, and I'm pretty sure this woman, I don't know, because, not to be sexist here or ageist, but I don't know if this woman was a professional wrestling fan. I don't think she was. She was probably there with her boyfriend or whatever, the guy she was sitting next to. But when she saw this scene of Kerry Von Erich's death and what happens when they show Kerry Von Erich's death, it was she gasped out loud. You know what I mean? Because this was not what happened here was not expected because all the tragedies that had happened to them, Kerry Von Erich losing his foot, which they show, he lost his foot in a motorcycle accident in 1982. And the father, even after he lost his foot, the father continued to push him into professional wrestling, even with one foot. He was disabled in this motorcycle accident, and the father still continued and continued to relentlessly push his son into wrestling. It's like he almost, Fritz Von Erich, it was like he didn't really care about his sons. To him, his sons were just a means to an end of a way to get money as a revenue source. It never stopped with him. Like one son died, okay, we'll push the next son. He tried to even make Mike Von Erich, the one that I said he wanted to be a musician, he tried to make Mike into David, and David didn't even look like Mike. Didn't even resemble Mike. And it got to the point where, like I said, Mike, he just couldn't take it anymore. And he's like, he tells the mother, "If I'm not David, I'm never gonna be David." You know, it was like he was always Fritz just didn't stop, and after the very end, Fritz continues, and at the end of the movie, continues to blame uh, the sons for the problems. They're the problems. They're too weak. They're not strong enough. They have to be stronger. They can't cry. They're men. They have to be tough. They have to be macho. And he doesn't allow them until the very end to show any emotions. And it never happens with Fritz, but it happens with uh, Kevin. At the very end, he says, I started off as an older brother, but now I'm not even a brother, because he's the sole survivor. Like, here he had 5, 6 brothers, and he doesn't have not even one brother left. Little by little, this family got chipped away and chipped away at. It got to the point where Kevin didn't even want to go home to his family because he didn't want to contaminate his 2 sons, Ross, Ross and Marshall, with the Von Erich curse. Because allegedly, and they don't go into this in the movie, but they allude to it. Allegedly, during Fritz's wrestling career, there was a Jewish man, a Holocaust survivor, who saw Fritz's gimmick, and he objected, of course, to Fritz's gimmick of being a Nazi sympathizer. And he went to the backstage area when Fritz was wrestling, and he told Fritz, why are you a Nazi sympathizer? Why are you making light of the suffering that my people went through? I lost my entire family in the Holocaust. I hope that never happens to you. And this was before anybody in Fritz's family had ever died. And apparently this man got into a scuffle with Fritz and left a piece of Fritz's blood with something written in the Hebrew language, a piece of paper, in the locker room. And apparently this man, this Holocaust survivor, according to legend, had put a curse on the Von Erich family because Fritz portrayed this Nazi character. And, uh, the man objected to it. And the man put a curse on the Von Erichs, and this is the origin of the so-called Von Erich curse. So who knows if that's true? That's the story I heard. Through several sources. And they don't really, like I said, they don't talk about it in the movie, but that it's alluded to because Kevin doesn't, like I said, he don't really want to go home to his family because he doesn't want to contaminate them with the Von Erich curse. When it's how many stars I'm giving it? I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. A lot of it, uh, they didn't really go into a lot of specifics necessarily. I think I go into way more specifics when I have it on my video on them, the specifics of who they were. Necessarily, this is just a general movie made for general audiences, but I could have did without, honestly, as a straight heterosexual man. I could have did without a lot of the the scenes in tidy whities, a lot of the there's a scene uh, with Mike Von Erich in the shower. I could have did without a lot of that. Yeah, they're completely walking around in tidy whities. Um, mm, yeah, I get that. Point well taken. But still, okay, okay, but I feel like because of their no, I feel like because of their audience was a lot of women. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like okay, yeah, granted, all wrestlers wear uh, all wrestlers wear tidy whities. I get it, but it was geared towards like a lot of their older because a lot of their older female audience. Uh, pe- a lot of innuendo. I don't know. It's just weird. This is weird to see. You know, I guess because you don't really see that necessarily that type of undergarments worn by men today. You know, there's a lot of things that styles of hair and styles of music that'll look. Yeah, you would think that. You would think that at least, but not necessarily. Most of the demographics is men. So other men, you know, you know. But you do have bra and panties matches and stuff. So some of that is some of it is well, at least you did have bra and panties matches, you know, back when we were kids, you know, in the Attitude Era. You know, you didn't have it back in their days, and you don't have it now. But even the mother in the movie remarks to the boys. She says, "Next time, pants, because they come right in the they come right in the kitchen table, right in their underwear. You know, so even the mother's like, hey, you know, put on some pants. You know, and it's like four or five different scenes, and one with David Von Erich in the shower. You know, you know, they do mention WWE in one scene. Obviously, Kerry Von Erich goes to the WWE in 1990, and he wrestles there for 2 years. And they show the scene as uh, they show the part in SummerSlam 1990 when he wrestles Mr. Perfect. And when they show the wrestling, some of the wrestling scenes that they were able to get uh, access to, the film producers are from WWE, I'm assuming, who owns World Class Championship Wrestling and inducted the Von Erichs in 2009 to the Hall of Fame. Um, they show the actual real wrestling, the actual footage, the actual matches. Uh, of Kerry Von Erich and Mr. Perfect and of Kerry Von Erich. No, thank God, no. Just a scene with uh, Kevin Bonnet. I think it was either Kevin or Mike. Who knows? They all kind of blend together after a while, masturbating in the shower. It was a really weird scene. But hey, so much of World Class Championship Wrestling was predicated on sexuality and parading these boys out basically as male strippers or male sex symbols or sex objects to women in the audience. That was basic. If you really think about it, Fritz von Erich knew that the boys were in great shape. He knew that they were athletic kids. They weren't necessarily. I don't. I don't think people have remarked. Um, Lisa, when I first told her about it, she's obviously a woman. So when I first told her about it, and I showed her a picture. She didn't necessarily think that they were handsome uh, guys. The Laps fan, uh, they famously remarked in their commentary that they didn't think the Von Erichs uh, when they did the documentary on their podcast, they didn't think the Von Erichs were necessarily attractive guys. But hey, the audience at that time in Texas, the women that were watching professional wrestling, they thought so, and that was really all that necessarily matters. Even some of the most attractive celebrities, we might look back from the 70s and be like, hey, they weren't all that attractive, but to the people then at that time, whether it was men or women, even some of the women, I look back and think as guys, in our eyes, in our modern eyes, well, they weren't that attractive. What was making the men go so crazy at that time? But people have different standards in different times, different ethnicities where they grow up. They might think, hey, they were the greatest looking, whatever, you know what I mean? But we might not necessarily think that. So all that matters is the girls were paying the tickets to see them, and they were paying the big bucks to see them wrestle at the Sportatorium in Dallas. And that's really all that mattered to Fritz. But the point is, he was basically prostituting his sons to these women. You know what I mean? Because not only were they wrestling for them, they were actually sleeping with a lot of these female uh, 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 audience members. You know what I mean? Because back in the day, and other wrestlers have talked about this, before the days of the WWE, a lot of the people that would go to the audience, like Lisa's alluding to, would be heterosexual women. Women that were looking to hook up with somebody famous. You know what I mean? Somebody in great shape. You know what I mean? So Fritz was basically telling his sons, listen, sleep with all the women that you can sleep with, so we could put asses in seats and we can make money. Which really seems fucked up. But again, you see it in cases like the Kardashian mother. She does almost exactly the same thing, but with her daughters. So you see it all the time with celebrity kids. It just so happens that this is wrestling and not some other more popular form of entertainment. And the hypocrisy in Fritz von Erich is just like the hypocrisy in Michael Jackson's father, just like the hypocrisy even in Selena's father, like we talked about. Here they are, supposed to be overly religious family that is supposed to be grounded in their morality, but here the kids are, out here doing whatever around people that are doing audience members that are doing whatever. In any other case, this would be perceived, if this wasn't entertainment, this would be perceived as child abuse. Who parades their kids or who uses their kids, basically pimping out their own children to other people like this, except in the entertainment industry. But we see it all the time, you know. Because sex sells, and this is what uh, money can sometimes be the root of all evil, and especially this was the case with World Class, because again, a lot of their audience was female, so it wasn't like other territory. It wasn't like the WWE. See, the WWE, when they came around in the mid '80s, they changed professional wrestling because no longer was it the woman looking to get laid or the old man that was a redneck cheering for the bad guys to get fucked up. It WWE made it more of a kids show with Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, people like this that were geared towards kids, family friendly, not the kind of stuff you would see back in the day in the 70s and early 80s in the World Class days. It became more of a kiddie type show, and it stayed a kiddie type show until the mid 1990s when teenagers, those same kids that were watching Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, turned into horny teenage boys such as yours truly, and we started to want to look at Sable, Sunny, Jacqueline, and Braun panties matches, and we turned into teenage from little boys that were watching Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior into teenage boys that were watching Sable, Sunny, and Marlena and getting turned on by that. And telling teachers to suck it all the time and giving middle fingers like we were Stone Cold Steve Austin in the 90s. So it's switched. But before that, in the we was talking about, it was all horny ladies and rednecks that were all drunk looking to see a bloody fist fight. So wrestling audiences change. Now, I think a lot of wrestling audiences are just nerds, that are into anime and video games and stuff. You know what I mean? So the wrestling audience and who watches professional wrestling changes each and every decade. Horny teenage boys, little kids, horny ladies, rednecks, and then now you got the nerdy era where you go to a wrestling show nowadays and it's all just big geeks in their in their late 30s and early 40s that are into not only wrestling but anime and Japanese cartoons and video games, and it's kind of really niche stuff that the general population is not really into. you know, I mean, it'd be interesting to because, and you see them appealing to stuff like that when you have characters like New Day. It's getting way off topic, but characters like New Day coming out as video game characters, or Sasha Banks, so we're talking about anime and Japanese manga and shit that they even lose me. And I have some nerdy hobbies too, like Star Wars and other sci-fi type stuff. But they even lose me. They lose me at the video games and everything because today, in a conversation with the guy in charge of the movie tickets, I really realized how much of an nerdy type. I thought I was in the real high grade nerd category or geek category, but this dude started naming these obscure video games, things that he just made me seem like I was like the un coolest uncoolest person ever, and I just was completely at a loss for it. I I didn't know where. I'm like, okay, but yeah. Overall, I think this movie is the best wrestling movie ever. And again, that's not saying much because it's wrestling, and the movies in wrestling are, besides the wrestler, the 2008 version, the one that Lisa and I saw, not not the 1974 version with uh, that Vern Gagne made. Because that's, if you really want to go to sleep and you want to go to sleep thoroughly, watch that 1979. 74 Vern Gagne film, The Wrestler. That is really boring. But the 2008 Wrestler was really good. But again, that was fiction. That was not based on a real wrestler. That was based on more of uh, a caricature of a wrestler, a composite figure of a wrestler like Scott Hall, Jake the Snake Roberts. His life was all fucked up. You know what I mean? So that was the best wrestling movie. And other than that, there haven't been a lot of great wrestling movies. Most wrestling movies suck. Hey, when I was a kid, I thought the movie with Roddy Piper and Tonga Kid was a good movie. I thought it was just associated with wrestling. So um, from 1986, when Lou Albano was in it as Roddy Piper's manager. I thought that was a good movie, but obviously I watched it later and that sucked too. So other than this and 2008's The Wrestler, there haven't been a lot of great wrestling movies made. So it doesn't really have much competition. But this is good for Zach Efron. And again, I don't really know that much about Zach Efron other than High School High School Musical. That's the only thing I really remember him from. And he's the only guy. Him and the guy from Orange Is the New Black, Michael Heaton. I remember him. He plays the character of Bill Mercer in the movie. Other than that, um, I don't. I didn't really know anything about really the actors portraying them. I looked at it more to me as the Von Erichs. And again, I went in knowing a lot about them, and generally when you go in knowing a lot about something, the source material, you tend to pick it apart piece by piece, like I was doing, and you don't really enjoy it for what it necessarily is, and you don't necessarily look at it from virgin eyes. You know what I mean? Like generally, when I know a lot about a subject, like Sam a huge fan of The Color Purple, right? And I go see this new Taraji P Henson Fantasia version of The Color Purple. I'm gonna be like, damn, it wasn't like the Whoopi Goldberg version, and it wasn't like the book, and picking it apart piece by piece and what's accurate and what's inaccurate. So you can't really do that. You know what I mean? If you're a huge wrestling fan or you grew up with world class or you know a lot about this family like I do, don't approach it with a critical lens because you're gonna see a lot of inaccuracies, as I did. Approach it just as a regular movie viewer, and I think you will enjoy it. Peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see my next videos coming out. Love you.